Well, good morning. I guess now it's afternoon. I will admit to you that I did not realize whenever I agreed to speak at LogiCon that I would be speaking on Easter. That's how lost and going to hell I actually am. It was completely off of my calendar. I had absolutely no idea that it was going to be Easter. So I've already had a few people ask if I'm going to preach a little bit. And you'll just have to tell me, because I've yet to figure out what's the difference between me just talking and me preaching. You know, people will say, "Oh, I enjoyed your preaching." I'm like, I was just ordering something from the bar. I didn't realize I was actually preaching. So we may do a little bit of it just to satisfy everybody. But I really want to deal with an extremely, extremely important subject to me. Just a few months ago, I was fortunate enough to be asked to do a TEDx talk. And so I've known about it for quite a while, but life had moved very, 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 very quickly. And I was very busy, and I was very tired, and I was very stressed, and there was a lot of other things going on. As a matter of fact, I had also been hired, and so I now have a real-time job. So about the same time that I was supposed to get up on the stage in New Orleans and do this TED Talk, as it would work out, the next morning I would have to fly out at about 5 o'clock in the morning, fly to Jacksonville, Florida, where I would meet my new boss for the first time and show him that I'd actually learned everything that he had intended for me to learn. This moment of heading up on this stage for this TED Talk, I kid you not, was the most challenging moment of my adult life, and it completely took me off guard. The first second that I realized that something was terribly, terribly wrong was when I walked out onto the stage and I got a nice round of applause like you so kindly gave, and I turned to look at the audience and I noticed the clicker in my hand was shaking. I can't remember the last time that I was truly nervous. I'm always excited to talk to audiences, but I can't remember the last time I was truly, truly nervous. And so I got up and I began to talk about this subject of learning to unlearn. And that was the theme of the TEDx series there in New Orleans. And what I wanted to talk about was learning to unlearn how to be a people pleaser. And I started off this TED Talk saying I am a recovering people pleaser. And so that's the direction I was going. And it worked well, and if you go back and watch it, hopefully you won't think it sucks as bad as I think it sucks. And you'll probably hear some of the same things today that you'll hear in that video, but the difference is that when I was doing that, I was faking it. Because I just thought that I had gotten over being a people pleaser. I really thought that I had handled all of the rejection that had come through my outing, or at least being outed. I thought I had dealt with that. I'd seen just pages after pages of comments where people who didn't know me from Adam were talking about how horrible I was, and talking about how lost I was, and how maybe I never was saved. And I had dealt with that for 2 years, and I had received that rejection, a rejection which had been my largest fear of my entire life. I didn't realize it until I come out that the very thing that I had been fighting and resisting was public ridicule, was rejection. I wanted to be loved. I thirsted for being loved. It was as innate in me as a hunger for food. It was any other type of appetite that you could imagine. I craved not just public attention, but public approval. And that had been the monkey on my back for years. And I thought with all of the crap that I'd gotten, with my wife leaving, with us going through the foreclosure process, trying to save my home, being in the New York Times and receiving all those ugly comments, making my way into all of these other areas of rejection, I thought I had mastered that. But what I'm here to tell you this afternoon is that religion and religious philosophy is far trickier than we secular people have ever given it credit for being. Far more tricky than we've ever given it credit for being. What's amused me is over the last 2 years to be part of the secular movement and to see just as much religious effect within the secular movement as I ever saw in Christianity. Now that'll make you popular, won't it? We should have taken up the offering before that. But it's really true. And what I feel myself compelled to do is to tell you that there is a temptation, even within the secular movement, to resist rejection. So as I stood there on that platform with that TED Talk, suddenly it was dawning on me that I wanted to please these people. Now, I admitted that I was still a recovering people pleaser because I knew instinctively that I wasn't quite where I wanted to be yet, but I didn't know how far off base I really was until I saw my hand trembling. Until I began to struggle to form my sentences, until I began to longingly look out in the audience and look at every single face and try to pull from them some type of positive approval. Up until that moment, I didn't realize that I was still very, very much addicted to public approval. I had gotten over this rejection. It was okay now for Christians to think that I was going to hell. That part didn't bother me. As you already know, the part that bothered me was that they were so content with the idea that I was going to hell. That's the part that bothered me. But I'd gotten over all the rest. But unbeknownst to me, what was slowly happening was some other identity was being created. If you know my story, then you already know that about the time the New York Times article came out, only about a week to 2 weeks later, I got a book deal. And this book deal took on a life of its own. If you've never written a book, if you've never been involved in that industry, let me tell you, book deals make people crazy. They make people greedy, they make people crazy, they make people paranoid, and me included. But the other thing that this particular book did was it created an opportunity for the publisher, for the publicist, to create an identity for me that I had not yet grown into. And I felt obligated to have hope where there wasn't any hope. The majority of the book I found very easy to do because I just told my story, and I told many of those stories many different ways and many different times throughout my life. But when we got to the end of the book, we turned in that first draft. And the publisher came back and said, you know, that's all really cool. We see the faith side. We see how you made your way through all these different churches and all these denominations, but what we don't see is we don't see very much about atheism. And I told him, I said, because I don't know very much about atheism. And then they went a little bit further after we added in a little atheism, and they said, well, we see the faith side, we see a little atheist side, but what we don't necessarily see is we don't see the hope side. And it was because I didn't have hope yet. Now, if you've read the end of the book, I've gotten so many compliments from the very end of the book. And that entire piece at the end of the book, spoiler alerts, actually comes from a message, quote unquote, that I preached at Reason in the Rock. All right? It's one of the lectures that I gave there. And I talked about hope in that situation, and we just manipulated it a little bit and edited it somewhat and put it as the end of the book. And the reason I was forced to do that is because I was obligated to live under this identity that yet didn't match me. Because I didn't feel hope. My wife had not been gone that long. I was still struggling under paying this huge trustee note for the bankruptcy court. Here I stood in court. Standing there after a lifetime of working, a lifetime of trying to build some type of character, some type of reputation within my community. Now I stood there in court, literally a broken man, waiting for the judge to tell me that he could somehow relieve me at least of the time restraint of my debts. It was embarrassing. It was humiliating. But now they're wanting me to talk about hope, that everything is light and fluffy and beautiful. And because of the obligation of the book, we just pulled it up. We pulled it like we were picking ourselves up from our own bootstraps, and we created something that fortunately has inspired people all across the country, and I'm thankful for that. But the reality of it was, it cast me in a light that I had not yet grown into. And so when I ended up there with the TED Talk, at that moment, the crowd that was looking at me, they had an expectation. They had an expectation of a maturity, of an understanding, of a wisdom, of an experience that I had not yet gained. And I felt obligated to give them that situation. I felt obligated to share that with them, even if I had to make it up and pretend. And so what I want to tell you is this. I'm going to leave plenty of time for questions, so write them down if you have to. I love the questions. What I want to tell you is this, is that rejection is absolutely, positively your best friend. It's a lover that you should court every day. It's a precious, precious treasure in your life. Far too many people never experience their true selves because their life never brings them into a situation that they face massive rejection. If you find yourself as being someone whose sexuality is not coherent with our modern culture, I know that has to be a great burden to bear, but consider this. The rejection that you have to overcome is a liberating force in your life. Because rejection strips away all pretense. It truly does separate your real friends from your fair-weathered friends. Whenever you stand up for something that is corely you, something that is so you that you could never be any different, you couldn't change it, as the song says, if you wanted to. When you stand up for that and you're rejected, it's a reality check. It suddenly strips away all the pretense and the cloud of illusion. It strips us of the politeness that we're taught to exhibit within our culture in many situations. And it leaves you bare. People ask me, how is it that you get up on the stage and you jump around and you have a good time? It's because very early on I learned to be mostly naked whenever I got up on the platform. Stripped bare of all pretense. But that book and all of the interviews, all of a sudden people were passing around the CNN interview where I was, kind of treated a little ugly. And they were like, you handled it so awesome. You're so sweet. You're so great. Matt Delahanty many times will say, I'm not a Jerry DeWitt. I love people, but I don't love people the way that Jerry DeWitt loves people. I don't love people the way Jerry DeWitt loves people. Nobody could. Right? But I got lucky a couple of times. Believe it or not, whenever I was doing that CNN interview where they kind of tried to mess with me a little bit and challenge me over the difference between agnosticism and atheism, believe it or not, I was sitting in this little bitty work shack of a trailer in Houston, Texas, out in the warehouse district, right? Sitting in a little straight back chair, and the only part of it that looks like you see on CNN is the part that's directly behind me. I've got no monitor. I can't see the people who are talking to me, and I can barely hear them because right when the interview started, Spanish music began to play over my earpiece. And so somehow, fortunately, with a huge amount of practice and concentration, the interview goes over well, and people begin to write me, and they're like, you're the kind of person that I want to be. And I'm like, damn, I'm the kind of person I want to be. But I'm not that person. But when I stepped up on that platform, the house was packed. The theater was absolutely gorgeous. The history of New Orleans was seeping through the walls of that theater. There was such an excitement in the air, and I was so proud, and just seeing those letters of TED in the background gave me goosebumps, and I felt like I was arriving someplace that I'd wanted to be all my life. But at the same time, as I stepped up on that platform, I wrapped a cloak around me and walked up there with an identity that wasn't completely and truly mine. And you may not be able to see it in the video, and I hope you can, and if you can, keep it to yourself. But I can see it, and I felt it, and I knew that it wasn't me. I knew that I'd already slipped into a different role. So I want you to understand more than anything that this rejection that you have to face, and when I'm talking about rejection, I'm not talking about the obvious rejection from the religious community. I'm talking about maintaining that same level of bravery, that same sense of courage, that same spirit of adventure for a new life that you somehow mustered in all of your fear. That same spirit of courage that you used to tell that one particular loved one that you no longer believed. You will have to maintain that same courage even in the secular movement. Because it's not about being the same. It's about being yourself. Can I get a Darwin? It's a reality check. And it's not fun. There's absolutely nothing pleasant about watching your closest relationships dissolve because for the first time in your life, you're being true to yourself. And then wondering, who the hell did they even love all this time? Because it wasn't me. It's not easy watching these relationships dissolve, knowing that they must have been built on something besides the reality of you, the uniqueness of you. They were built on some commonality that you no longer share, and it's heartbreaking and it's tragic. And so, all of a sudden, you're introduced to the secular movement. You walk in and it's this oasis. Because by and large, everybody agrees with the things that you agree with. And you feel as if that you're being loved for your own individuality. But I double dog dare you to post something you know the bloggers are going to disagree with. Right? Because you know that there's this new thing, there's this new identity, there's this new cloak that's wrapped around you. I'm here today to tell you, you deserve better than that. Your uniqueness deserves better than that. There is absolutely no one in the secular movement that deserves your reverence. No one. No matter how many followers they have, no matter how many, well, except for me, but I thought that was obvious. There's no one anywhere that deserves your reverence. No one. This is actually out of a child's coloring book. And that's what we do. So let's be Easter oriented for just a moment. We all understand the mythology of Easter, and we understand the symbolism of resurrection that's now attached to it. Resurrection is new life, it's new birth. If we're not very careful when we walk into this new life of being part of the secular movement, we'll once again come into a movement, come into an organization, come into a fellowship, if you will, as little children who immediately and instinctively will show reverence where reverence is not due. It's not due. The only thing that should be revered is the uniqueness that you possess. That's it. That's all. It's more important than mom and dad. It's more important than husband and wife. It's more important than anything else that will ever be in your life, because you are that one single expression. You will only be here once. There will only be one you, and nobody else can be you. No one else can play your role. No one else can even imitate you well. And if you are not you, then the universe will never see you. That's the only thing that needs to be revered. So, what's the point with that? The point of that is this. In spirituality, in religion based on spirituality, Christianity in particular, you're not allowed to be lost. Right? The whole thing is about not being lost. You're not allowed, except for under very particular situations, you're not allowed to stand up in the middle of the congregation and say, I just don't know what the hell's going on. I don't know where my life's going. You're not allowed to say, I don't know where God's at. I pray, and all the rest of you, you're acting crazy and looking funny, and I'm just not feeling it. Right? You're all saying that you're praying and you're getting things, and I'm praying and ain't nothing happening. You're not allowed to do that. You have to, even when the heart of your hearts knows that you're lost and confused and undone and you don't have direction, your heart of hearts knows that you have to pretend that you know where you're going and you know what you're doing. Do not feel compelled to bring that into your secular life. It's okay not to know your politics. Politics are complicated. It's okay to still be trying to figure that out. It's okay to not completely understand your sexuality. Right? If an after party turns into an orgy, you're not obligated. Right? You might feel obligated, but you're not obligated. Because it's about your uniqueness. Here is the difference. when we were in religion, we did not do good, we did not toe the line just for goodness sake. We did so because we were trying to defend something that was imaginary. We did so because we were trying to convince people that we possessed something that we did not possess. When you go out of this building and you go out of this convention, you are not obligated to do good in order to prove that secular values are right. Because they just are. You don't have to go out and be a good person because you're afraid if you're not a good person, then people will suddenly start defying the law of gravity. Because it's true whether you're a good person or not. If you leave out of here and you do good just for goodness sake, that's okay, as long as that's good for you. Because to feel any other sense of obligation is to miss the point and is to be right back in the same religious mindset that you freed yourself from. And that will mean that all that you lost in coming out will be even a greater loss, because now you've lost the very sense of freedom that you had in the beginning. It's about your uniqueness. It's about you. And so it's okay whenever every other atheist in the room is defending one particular point. It's okay for you to say, I'm just not there yet. I started this big, beautiful journey. This big, beautiful journey. And once I got free, I intended on staying free. Once I was out from under other people's obligations, once I was no longer absolutely obligated to toe someone else's party line, I decided I wouldn't pick up any more lines. And so I'm still thinking about that. I'm still working my way through that. I'm still reading that book. I don't know exactly how I feel about that. And what is important is not what the movement thinks. It's not what the leaders of the movement thinks. What is important is what I think about it. Because there's only one me. Can I get one more Darwin? So, last slide, and then I'll take your questions. I have no idea what time it is. Have I gone 2 hours yet? I'm doing good, thank you. So, obviously, I'm juvenile. You've already witnessed that. This blurry picture is of me, obviously, elementary age, setting out in my grandmother's front yard, and I was spoiled rotten. Spoiled. You probably would have never guessed that. But I get what I want. Spoiled rotten. And so I set out there with the latest, greatest, a little toy imitation CB system, I don't even remember if it works or not. But I remember dialing the dial, trying to tune in. Just trying to tune in. And that's what was wrong that day that I was doing the TED Talk, was that I was tuned in to the wrong frequency. I was tuned in to what the audience thought, or what the audience wanted to hear, what the audience needed to hear for me to sell those damn books, right? Instead of being tuned in to me. That moment, you've all read it in the book, or you've heard it over the audio, or you've heard it on some video somewhere, but that moment that I was honest with myself and looked myself in the mirror and said, you no longer believe. That moment of tuning into the real me, that was cosmic, right? It was like your favorite episode of Cosmos, just on the inside, right? It's like suddenly you discovered a new dimension or a new universe, and it was beautiful because it was you. That moment of tuning in, that moment of clarity, that's a human experience that you can't share with anybody else, only you. And so I was out of touch. This is me. This is me now, right? Trying to just stay tuned into myself. What you have to deal with for the rest of your secular experience with me is you have to deal with a person who's trying to figure out who the hell they are. And sometimes that may fit your politics and sometimes it may not. But that has to be okay. Sometimes I may attend the orgy, sometimes I may not. I don't know. And that has to be okay, right? Because this is about me, for me. So with that being said, should we preach for just a second? Y'all thought I was, didn't you? There was a gift that was given to each and every one of us. This beautiful gift, it was a hidden treasure, a treasure that has been covered up year in and year out of your life, sometimes covered up by relationships, sometimes covered up by mistakes, sometimes hidden, sometimes wrapped up and kept from the bare naked world and the naked truth of reality. But nevertheless, it was a gift that was always shining, always glowing, always animating into the rest of your existence. Whenever you thought that you were in complete silence and complete darkness, there would be a little hum in the background. There would be a little light that would begin to illuminate that dark night. That little gift, it would stand still. It would never move. It would never leave. It was irrefutable. It was unmovable and unchangeable. No matter where you went, no matter what you did, that gift would stay there. That gift was honing itself. It was working itself slowly but surely up to the surface of your life. You didn't know it. You thought you were in control. You thought you had everything going your way. But little did you recognize there was a gift that was working its way up to the surface. You thought, you believed, you hoped that you were the master of your own destiny. But little did you know that particular destiny that you were so in love with wasn't yours in the first place. It had been given to you. It was the expression of someone else's gift. It was their light outshining yours. It was their sound, their voice echoing across the corridors of your experience. But your gift would not be denied. Your gift would find its way to the top. Your consciousness would continue to chip away at the cornerstones of your existence. All of your traditions would be laid bare. All of your edifices would be brought down low. Before it would be over, you would seek safety in the arms of darkness, unable to deal with the rejection of your lost life. But that's the moment. That's the moment that all of the covering is lifted, all the debris is washed away, and that gift finally makes its way to the surface, breaks through the impenetrable barrier of social standings, and shines bright. And in the mirror, you see that gift was you. Thank you. Too kind. Too kind, too kind. Thank you very much. I'm going to pose for pictures. Y'all just do what you need to do.
So, have any questions? Anyone? Here's one. I'll try this again.
Is it just me or is it hot in here? I'm too fat to work out like that.
Jerry, as always, we'd love to have you here. Your book is fabulous. In the book, you talk about that moment when a friend asked you to call you in the middle of the night and said, "Pray with me.
Yes.
My loved one is dying." What is a good response from people like us who don't believe in miracles and God's going to make everything right? What is the best, most humane, most human answer that we can give if we have a friend in that position?
Well, obviously, my opinion is just my opinion. First off, let me say I was lucky, very, very lucky, because she did not use the words, "Will you pray for me?" If she would have said, I knew what she wanted because I'd been her pastor for years. I knew my role in that position, as other ministers here would know. But if she would have said, "Will you pray for me?" then that part of the book would probably be completely different because I don't know exactly what I would have done. I tried to bail out of the conversation before she got those words out. The humane thing to do, knowing that that's coming, it honestly depends on who you are. You know, I've got some atheist friends that for them the humane thing to do would say to that person, well, listen, why don't you pray, and I'll stay here on the phone with you while you pray. I'll be here for you while you pray. There's other people there. It goes across the spectrum that at that moment, depending on the severity of the situation, they might pray with them. Everybody's got a different take on what is the right thing for them to do. For me, because I've now encountered that situation since, the thing for me to do is I will try, just like I did in the book, I'll try to find something positive that I can say. For instance, with her, the man was young that had been in the accident. I said, well, your brother's very, very young, so that's on his side. Very fervor, we'll probably be able to bounce back from that. The specialists have been called in, that's on your side. They got him to the emergency room very quickly, that's on his side. And so I was trying to be encouraging and give her a sense of hope without giving her false hope through prayer. And so I would try to be as encouraging as possible. Now I will just tell you, and this is where I'm getting past all of this. If my grandmother is on her deathbed and she asked me to ask Jesus into my heart and to speak in tongues, buddy, I'm asking Jesus in my heart and speaking in tongues because she's on her deathbed. And that's just the way it is. That's my love for her. And we all know that there's nothing to any of that, and when she passes, that will be over, and it will not have changed anything about me unless you videoed me doing it and you put it on YouTube and nobody buys my book. Right? So it really depends on the situation. Anybody else?
Hey Jerry, I was thinking about you're talking about how we try to be people pleasers and we give up our individuality in a lot of ways, trying to conform to a group. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on that observation, plus the observation that we secular people seem to be a lot less successful at organizing than religious people. So is there a trade-off, and is there maybe a happy medium where maybe an organization isn't everything you want, it doesn't express 100% of your individuality, but you can still support it and be an enthusiastic part of it?
Right. An organization that doesn't express 100% of your individuality that you can still support is also called a family. And it once again goes back down to relationships. And so, yeah, you can find that balance. I think we do that. I think we naturally do that all the time. You may belong to a national organization that you financially support. Every so often they do or say something that you're not crazy about. I'm not saying that that's when you should, pull your funding from them by any means. Because more than anything, what I appreciate now is that all of this is complicated, and sometimes as secular people, we really do want to make things black or white. It's amazing. We'll get a George W. Bush attitude sometimes. Either you're for us or you're against us. And I don't think that we should do that. I think we, along with our tolerance, and we're tolerant about what we think we should be tolerant about, right? Along with our tolerance, then we should appreciate the complexity of things. You're never going to be able to support a group or an organization that 100% of the time does exactly what you would do if you was in charge of it. So I think you continue to support it anyway. You balance it out and see, is it really doing what you hope that they will do in the long run? But I definitely think there's a balance. But it's always going to be complicated. And that's the great part about it, is that it's going to be complicated. Anybody else? This will be the least questions I've ever received. Everybody knows me, has read the book. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I have a lot of friends in entertainment that do yoga, they meditate. And
Right.
It seems to be real healthy.
Sure. Speaking in tongues is real healthy as well. Unless you add the snakes. Yeah. Or the organist. Yes. That's a Pentecostal joke. Only the people down front get it. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it is healthy. I think it's very healthy. Sam Harris has brought out a whole lot about meditation and using different parts of Eastern philosophy in a secular way that is beneficial. We Pentecostals, ex-Pentecostals in the room, we could speak in tongues right now if we wanted to. It would be soothing to us, probably not so soothing to you. But you're right. Here's my take on it. And I thought I got this. And I think I did have it for a moment, and then the book and the notoriety and all that got away from me. But here's my take on this. It's not that I went from one side to the other. Okay, because that's what Christianity and the people who know me accuse me of. Well, you were on this side and now you went to that. No, I feel like I'm above the whole thing. I feel like I'm above the whole thing. And, you know, with my height, one of my fantasies is to visit Japan. All right? I want to visit Japan, and I need to do it quickly because they're getting taller every year as well. And so I want to visit Japan, and while I'm over there, if there's a Shinto ritual going on, then I want to be able, as a human being on this planet, only living once, to go and participate in that Shinto ritual without being excommunicated from the next convention. You know, and because I'm above it. It's not that I'm on one side of it or the other. I'm above the whole thing. The whole thing is now mythology to me, which gives me the ability to participate in whatever I want to. Yeah. I mean, honestly, if I had not gotten the press coverage that I had gotten, I would still go to the church that's a few blocks from my house when I felt like getting up on Sunday mornings. I would go, maybe to the late service, just to enjoy the music. But now if I go, it's a freaking thing, right? You know, now everybody's like, you know, or there's cameras following me or something, you know. But I would have enjoyed to have that amount of freedom. Is it? I keep telling people it's okay. I apologize.
You talk about being brave and that it's important for us. And my question is that he's influenced me because he listens to you to be braver.
Smart man.
And I was at my oncologist office a couple months ago, and an oncology nurse asked to pray for me. And I've been doing this for 3 years. I've had so many nurses and doctors pray for me, and finally I just said, I'm an atheist.
Absolutely.
And I would really just appreciate you not.
Right.
And then I had to give a deposition a couple of weeks ago, and I refused to swear on the Bible.
Right.
My concern about these things, about being brave, is what about that, I fear not being treated the same by my doctors. I fear being stigmatized, or that they won't give me the same care. Like, is that bravery more important than keeping my mouth shut?
I don't know.
I mean, is that a personal?
It's a personal, I think it's a personal thing. You know, there's been people throughout history, and obviously most of them have been religious, that they've went all the way to the stake. You know, they've been burned alive for their beliefs. That was their conscience. That was, you know, I mean, we would probably, you know, granted say that the God virus is, you know, pretty strong with them. But that's what they did as an expression of who they were in that state of mind. And so I think that's a choice we have to make individually. Just not too long ago, flew to Las Vegas. You don't need to know that. I flew to Los Angeles, and they lost my luggage. You know, so I'm in JCPenney's, struggling trying to put stuff together because I got business meetings the very next morning. And this guy comes up, and he's very, very friendly. And he says, you know, he makes chit chat. He's working for JCPenney's, all right? And so he walks up, he's making chit chat. And all of a sudden, just out of the blue, he says, I'm doing pretty good. You know, I must have asked how you doing or something. And he says, but I'd be doing better if I could just get back into church. And I was like, really? I'm just trying to get these clothes. You know, I'm just trying to find a 16 and a half. That's all I'm trying to do, you know. That's all I'm trying. And so I made a conscious decision right then, you know, because I let him go on. And I don't know him. He doesn't know me. We'll probably never see each other ever again. And he says, and I said, is that what you think is best for you? And he says, yeah, that's what I think. I said, okay, well, you just go do what you think is best for you. You know, and that's how I answered that. Obviously, I wouldn't be in the shape I'm in today if that's how I answered everything. But it's personal, it's individual. Now, what will happen if you show your true colors and they reject you over it, it's a reality check. If they treat you differently because of that, that's something you needed to know about them to start with. You know, because there's a level of professionalism that isn't there. So it always does you good to get to the reality of it.
I was wondering, do you think that being a people pleaser has something to do with being religious? Like it has some effects? Because I used to be a really fanatic religious. And no, I'm not religious anymore, but I'm still very people pleaser. So I'm wondering, do you think there is some connection between them?
I've seen so many people in my religious experience that were not people pleasers. You know, I've pastored a bunch of them, you know, that I really wish they had just a little dose of people pleasing. So I don't know if there's a correlation or not. I know that the religious institution, or at least particular ones, are attractive to people pleasers sometimes because it gives you a method to work within. You've got a mechanism now, where you can please the pastor, or please, people in the congregation. So they probably play off of each other, but, there's some not so nice people out there as well in religion.
Not used to microphones. Jerry, I got a testimony for being brave.
Tell it, brother.
I'm the only atheist on my whole company, and I'm surrounded by non-denominational, mostly Catholic, you name it. And anyway, I brought up the movie Cosmos and started talking about it, and I started talking with some electricians I work with, and within 15 minutes I just came out with myself saying, well, I'm atheist. I don't really believe in the religion part. I met 5 atheists that moment. And all 5 of us did not know the others were atheists.
Right.
And there was actually only one other Catholic in the area. So coming out and being yourself actually helped at that moment. I actually met 5 more friends that I could talk with at work.
That's exactly right. I think that's great. Let's give that testimony a hand.
When we talk about being good for goodness sake, I'm curious in your opinion or belief, is not every decision we make selfish? Every
Yes.
single decision that
Sure.
we make, regardless of how much it helps someone else.
Absolutely. Yeah, our nervous systems are designed to where we're either trying to avoid pain or obtain pleasure. So ultimately, at its core, I would agree with that's the way it is. I just think we're not always conscious of those core motivations, but that core motivation is always about pleasing ourselves. Sure. I agree with that. 100%.
When you were on, and forgive me for having you repeat something you already said, but when you were on CNN and you were asked your opinion between atheist or agnostic, what did you say?
Well, what ended up happening was when I described to him, what they always try to do is make you say there is no God, that kind of thing. And I'm trying to remember that particular interview. And whenever, when I was explaining that, you can't know for sure that something doesn't exist, that type of situation, then he was like, oh, well, that sounds more like, being agnostic. And that was fine. Actually, when they had contacted me to talk about the Community Mission Chapel down in Lake Charles, our little secular congregation. Well, they put up, not by any permission of ours, they put up on the screen, the banner on the bottom, Atheist Church. Well, we don't call it that. We know there's no such thing as an atheist church. All right, you can play with those words if you want to, but by definition, that wouldn't necessarily be the thing. So they were hung up on atheists, so whenever I was basically describing, of course you don't know what you don't know, they were like, oh, well, that sounds agnostic, so they were hung up. So I don't even remember how I defined it, but I, more than anything, just stood my ground, quite honestly, that you've got a right to express yourself how you want to. Now, what I say in my creed, little credo that's in the front of my book, is that skepticism is my nature, free thought is my methodology, right? Agnosticism is my conclusion, and what I mean by that is that after 25 years of being in the ministry and studying theology, I ended up with more questions than answers, so I know that I don't know things, so I'm agnostic about it. I don't even know if I can know those things. So agnosticism is my conclusion to my theological study, but then the next line is atheism is my opinion. Looking at the evidence that exists for our cosmic explanations versus the evidence that does not exist for our mythologies, that brings me to the opinion that atheism is correct. But what's important is, then I say my motivation is humanism. So.
Jerry, describe what happened in your congregation when Phil Robertson made his big to-do.
I don't. Oh! You talking about recently with the Duck Dynasty folks?
The redneck conversation that he put out there.
Yeah. Honestly, the secular congregation didn't react to it in any specific way or unique way any more than the rest of social media did, having a field day with it. But I will say my son was very clever, and my son special ordered a camouflage hat, and in hunter orange, it's embroidered, and it says Southern Made Atheist. And it looks just like the Duck Dynasty hats. And so that was, yeah. They'll be for sale soon.
Sometimes I'll get the question from my mom, being an ex-Christian. She'll be like, but didn't you feel God, or didn't you feel Jesus in your heart when you were saved and stuff? And I can never really come with like a good answer with that. So how would you respond to that?
I'll always say, yes, I thought that's what I was feeling. Yes, I felt things, and I thought that was the explanation for what I was feeling. But now, since I've studied neurology, now since I know more about the nervous system and the broad spectrum of human experience, I know how those feelings are generated. And those feelings are generated not just within Christianity, but Buddhists feel the same thing. They feel the same thing in Islam. They feel the same thing in secular world whenever they're walking through a museum. And so that's usually how I explain it. It's kind of a short, condensed version, which is unusual for me.
If anybody can have that feeling tonight, I don't know what else to say, but you can have those feelings without having an explanation in God, from my opinion. I mean, I felt that way sitting here and listening to Jerry. I do have coherence. So we can have those feelings without having to have a religious cause.
Yes, absolutely. And what's going to be tricky about it, and maybe this doesn't apply to everyone, depending, it either will or will not, depending on your religious background, but for us ex-Pentecostals, they actually drove for how many hours? 6 hours? Did anybody drive further than 6 hours? Y'all drove how far?
From Tyler, it was almost 7.
Let's give them a hand. Isn't that awesome? So there is an intensity of emotion that, though it's duplicated in secular situations, just like Jason said, it's a little more difficult to get that intensity, that level of intensity, without the mythology, without being part of that religious philosophy. And that's just how we've evolved, that it's easier to generate those feelings in those situations when you believe those situations. You can take, for instance, let's say you went to a Mayan structure where, the sun only enters the temple, on the equinox or whatever. For us, because we understand how that works, we would still be all inspired. We'd be all inspired by the craftsmanship, that these people obviously demonstrated, and would probably feel goosebumps and be moved by it. But it probably wouldn't be fair to say we'd be moved to the same level that the Mayans were moved, when they did it. And so that's what we have to work with. We have this fundamental, beautiful truth that every time we're rejected, it exposes a little bit more of reality. What we now need is for our poets to become energized and to express this reality, just like Cosmos is doing in such a fantastic way, in a way that does give us that intensity of experience. Because why not have those experiences? We're human beings. It's part of who we are. It's part of our history. We might as well enjoy them and use it in moderation. Right? Anybody else? Oh.
Jerry, is your car working better than last time I saw it?
Yes, it is. You know what was wrong with it? A cam sensor. Do what?
Reason on the rock is your daily.
Exactly. Yeah, a cam sensor. Yeah. Isn't that awesome information? Did you enjoy that, YouTube? It's a cam sensor. You believe that crap? Yes, sir.
After my mom passed away, I asked my dad, I said, did her faith give her a lot of comfort, when she passed? And he said, yes. Well, I'm an atheist, right? So, if I need to be comforted in my end time, that's self-delusion. We don't have it.
Right.
Would you speak to that?
Yeah, and here's the answer. We don't have it. We don't have that. And it is tricky. And there are secular philosophies that attempt to address that. And I think each one of us can grow into those philosophies and be comforted in some way. Once again, religion is so good at doing what it does. We may be able to duplicate it, but not completely emulate it, right? And so will we create a secular philosophy that is as comforting as knowing that you're going to see your loved ones again as soon as you die? I don't know if we'll ever be able to do it to that extent. Now, the payoff, as you already know, is we trade that false hope of an everlasting life for living in the present, right? Of living in the now and not wasting that moment. We actually use that awareness as a motivation to not be stupid now. right? And not to waste now. And so it's, in one way, it's actually beautiful and ultimately comforting. The clearer you are that you don't get a second chance, the more motivated you are to take advantage of this chance. And so that's the trade-off. But will we ever be able to truly replace that? I don't know. I'm going to leave here kicking and screaming. Put me on life support. Don't you dare give up. Darwin.
For me, that question, I found intellectual honesty is a lot more powerful for me than having faith in the myth.
Yeah, it's all about, you know, I'm taking his question as trying to be in that moment, in that last moment. Now, I will add this one little piece. What is starting to work in me and give me some consolation is becoming more and more, I hate to use the word certain, but having a clear appreciation that when I'm gone, I won't know it. And that actually is beginning to create a peace that did not exist when I believed I was going to be forced to play a harp for 1,000,000 years. Right? Because I got little fingers. And I was like, that's going to be a stretch for a long time, you know. And so that's actually starting to work in me. And I'll be honest, where I've started dealing with that is I fly a lot, you know, and that's different for someone from out part of the world. And so I've had to deal with getting on that plane and being completely out of control. All right? It's no longer up to you at all. And so that's had it on my mind. And I am comforted from the idea that, yes, the party will go on, but I won't even know there ever was a party. That was Hitchens, by the way. Did that. Put somebody. I thought I felt your vibe.
Okay. Basically, when I look around at the secular community, particularly young people or people who are just now coming out of faith and going into it for a variety of reasons, and I think it's complicated, I wouldn't ask you to go into it, but there's a lot of anger. And particularly for me, actually, ironically, I went from kind of being an ass atheist or a Christian into being kind of an ass atheist. I would attack people. I was just really kind of vicious. Beforehand, I used to tell people not to tan. It was desecration of the body. And said horrible things to a young lady once because she had sex, and that's not so funny. But on hindsight, what is funny is I realized it was more because she didn't have sex with me. But that's not.
Been there, brother.
What would you
What
would you tell a young person? What advice would you give them to kind of, because I don't think it's positive for the atheist community to be, and you have to go through the anger.
Yes.
But you have to somehow come out on the other side, not isolating yourself from all these people who are good people.
Right.
They just believe something we believe is a little bit insane.
Well, I tell the angry atheist, because I was one as well, but I'm, you know, kind of a lover, not a fighter, so I wasn't in practice of being offensive, but I was still feeling it. You know, I was still very angry. You know, I tell them two things. The first thing I tell them is, you've got a right to do it. You've got a right to do it. You know, if you can't come in here and be angry in the secular movement, then we've just created another religion. You know, it's all of this, you know, that I've just talked about. The other thing that I say is the same kind of things I'd say to my son when he would come home and he was angry about something at school and, you know, swore that tomorrow he was going to go back and whip somebody's ass, you know, which he's 5 inches taller than me and, you know, looks like Thor when he walks in the room, so he could have done it. You know, I'd give it some time. You know, give it some time. Let this pass through you. Show your newfound control over yourself, your newfound liberty to be who you want to be by allowing those emotions to pass through you without being affected by those emotions. You know, it's not saying don't go post the ugly thing, don't go, you know, confront the Christian. I'm not saying that's the answer, but I'm saying you've got a choice now that you didn't have when you was in religion. And so just give it time so that you make the right choice for yourself. Anybody else? You already tired of me? I'm so hurt.
Do you sometimes feel the pressure to be better
Yes.
than the average bear?
I feel.
Because you don't want to be labeled as the evil Christian, the evil atheist?
Yes. I feel pressure to be better than the best Christian.
Yeah.
It's in my mind, I'm going to out Jesus Christ. That's a meme. If I don't see it posted by this evening, I know you don't love me. And so I feel that pressure, and that's really what I'm talking about, is that we can't allow ourselves to fall into that trap. That I think that is a psychological trap. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't go be more Jesus than Christ. I'm not saying that I'm repeating it so y'all have time to write that. No. Yeah, thank you. I'm not saying that that's not what we should do. I just think we should do it for the right reasons if that is what we decide that we should do, because we will miss the point. Like for me, for instance, I've already spent several decades wearing someone else's identity, trying to be less like Jerry and more like Christ. That was what I was taught to do. I must decrease so that he can increase. And now to do that, now instead of being, Christ, I'm going to go be somebody else. To me, that just defeats the whole point. Yeah. And the truth is the truth regardless. So what? If somebody looks at you, think about this for a second. If somebody looks at you and says, are they going to say, I thought I might be an atheist, but that chick's an ass? Is that going to play out that way? It's really not. Because this is something that we don't choose to be. It's what we realize we are. And that person, regardless of how we act, they're either going to realize that's what they are or not. It's not saying that we can't have a positive influence one way or the other, but we're no longer the saviors of the world. We're no longer facing a deity who's going to charge us with blood on our hands if we're not a good example converting people to atheism. Yes.
I'm also curious, do you have now, or did you, when you first let go of the Christianity, a feeling of guilt for the time that you preached and spread the word then?
This is, I don't know if this is unique to me. I don't know if it means that I'm a psychopath. I will admit that Hannibal is my favorite show right now. I don't feel guilty. And one of the reasons I don't feel guilty, or a couple of reasons I think I don't feel guilty, is because I believed it. I meant it with all of my heart. If I was here and I was up here being an atheist because I was a con artist as a Christian and I got caught and this is how I'm, managing my probation or something, that would be different. But that's not it. Every step along the way, I was expressing to the best of my ability what I thought was true, what I thought was exactly right, to the expense of my family. My wife, she didn't leave because she's a believer and I became an atheist. She left because the ministry sucks, and being in that public limelight is hard on families, and then all of a sudden, my publicity just went out the roof. And so she went from being married to the person that everybody wanted to talk to in Walmart to being married to the person that nobody wanted to talk to in Walmart. And that was just a public, that was a public pressure that she didn't want to deal with. And so when you combine that I was sincere with we paid a heavy price for what we were doing, I've yet to feel guilty over it. And maybe I will one day. I've heard other people do. And it may just be something wrong with me.
Well, as much as I would like to keep all this going, we're cutting dangerously into our lunchtime.
Oh, suckers.
So, and a little round of applause for Jerry.
Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.